My name is Natalie Quinn. I'm 41. And the moment my father raised his champagne glass and called me a professional wanderer in front of 200 guests was the moment I decided to show him who exactly he'd been ignoring for 2 decades. He didn't know that while he was bragging about my brother's startup funding and future wedding, my face had just been shown on national television for leading the FBI's largest anti-terrorism sting of the year. But in that room, to him, I was still Nat who never settled down. Until I stepped forward and gave the FBI a reason to interrupt his toast. My name is Natalie Quinn. I'm 41 years old, and the moment I walked into my father's country club banquet hall, wearing the only black dress I owned and a heart full of restraint, I knew I shouldn't have come. But when Director Landon told me, "You've given this country everything. Take the weekend, Natalie. That's an order," I figured I could survive one evening. The occasion? My younger brother Austin's engagement party. 200 guests, catered steak, and champagne towers tall enough to drown in. The entire Quinn family tree was there, along with half of Dad's law firm and most of Austin's fiancée's side. Blonde, polished, moneyed people who referred to my father as Uncle Harry, even if they weren't related. I stood quietly near the back wall, half-shadowed under a sconce, sipping flat ginger ale and trying not to look like a federal agent on high alert. But habits die hard. Every movement, every smile, every laugh, I cataloged it all, instinctively scanning exits, watching hand movements, reading facial tension. That's what spending 2 decades undercover does to your brain. You don't untrain it. You don't want to. My father, Harold Quinn, former district attorney and part-time legend in our small Texas town, had just stepped up to the mic. He held his glass high, wearing the same smug confidence that used to fill our kitchen when I was a teenager, and disappointment was the only word he ever spoke to me directly. "Friends and family," he boomed. "Tonight we raise a glass to my son, Austin, soon-to-be husband, rising entrepreneur, and the pride of the Quinn name." The applause rolled like thunder. He paused, grinning at the front table where Austin sat beside his fiancée, soaking in the attention like a dry sponge dropped in water. "And of course, we're thrilled that my daughter Natalie could make it tonight," Dad added, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. "She works for the government, I believe. Something security-related. She's always been kind of a wanderer. Moved around a lot, still figuring things out." I froze. He chuckled, and the crowd laughed politely, not realizing, maybe not caring, how the words chipped at a lifetime of silence, of dismissals. My mother glanced sideways at her wineglass. My aunts nodded softly, eyes pitying. I kept my face blank, unbothered. Still figuring things out? 3 nights ago, I was in rural Montana, inside a trailer outfitted with fiber optic feeds, negotiating the final takedown of one of the most complex domestic terrorism networks in recent FBI history. For the past 18 months, I'd been the covert lead on Operation Winterdome, an effort so classified that even most agents didn't know my name. But to my father, I was just Natalie, the one who never stayed put, the one who never settled down. A waiter passed by with a tray of bourbon-glazed something, and I waved him off. My stomach churned with a cold, familiar ache. I'd come here thinking maybe, just maybe, I could exist in this room without shrinking. That was my mistake. As Dad launched into another story about how Austin once closed a deal during a golf game, my phone buzzed in my clutch. I checked it instinctively. One message, one name. "Director Landon, Natalie, turn on CNN now." My pulse quickened. I left the banquet hall without a word, heels clicking against the marble, the sounds of laughter fading behind me. There was a large TV mounted in the hallway bar, muted but showing a banner that made my breath catch. Breaking. FBI dismantles domestic threat cell. Operation Winterdome ends with 47 arrests across 5 states. Below it, my photo, official FBI headshot. The words beneath it burned. Natalie Quinn, special agent in charge of counterterrorism operations, led the effort. Sources say she is expected to brief the White House this week. My reflection in the bar's glass, same black dress, same tired eyes, stared back at me. I wasn't just someone who works for the government. And tonight, that truth was about to walk straight back into the banquet. The moment I stepped back into that banquet hall, everything felt louder. The music had shifted to something jazzy and smug. The scent of overpriced hors d'oeuvres lingered like arrogance in the air. The laughter was now bigger, looser. People had hit their second glass of wine. I moved back into my shadowed corner just as my father tapped his champagne flute with the side of his dinner knife. That sound, cling, 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 used to signal bedtime when I was 8. Now it signaled something worse. "Everyone," he said, his voice cutting clean through the noise like he owned the oxygen in the room. "If I could have your attention for just a moment." People turned, drinks half raised. My brother Austin looked up from his plate and grinned like a man with the world in his back pocket. His fiancée beamed beside him, the living definition of Southern debutante meets social media PR. My mother wore her usual strained smile, the kind that said I'm tired but polite about it. Dad held court like he was still in a courtroom. I want to talk for a second, he said, about what it means to be successful. I closed my eyes, not this again. A lot of people think success is just about money, he continued, but it's more than that. It's about consistency, about making smart choices, about building something steady, something real. He gestured to Austin, pride radiating from him like stage lights. Take my son here. Austin has always been focused. A football captain, honor grad, owns his own logistics company now. He's building a life, brick by brick. That's success. Applause rippled through the crowd. I didn't move. I was still watching him, waiting. Dad cleared his throat. And of course, I have a daughter, too. My jaw tightened. Well, Natalie's had a more adventurous path. Government work. She's always been restless. I think she's in security now. Travels a lot. Never quite settled down. That got a laugh. Not a big one. Not cruel. Just enough to sting. Just enough to confirm what I'd always known. They saw me as a drifter with a government badge. She's here tonight, which we're thankful for, he added, lifting his glass half-heartedly. We don't always get to see her much. I guess when you don't have a mortgage or a family, it's easier to travel. Another chuckle. That did it. That last sentence, careless and cruel, slid under my ribs like a dull blade. I glanced around the room. Some guests looked uncomfortable. A few were scrolling on their phones. One woman, someone I'd gone to high school with, was staring at the screen, then at me. Her eyes grew wide. I knew why. CNN was still running the story, and slowly it was starting to register. I stepped forward. Natalie, someone whispered as I passed. My father noticed the movement, confused at first, then vaguely annoyed like I was breaking the rhythm of his perfect toast. I walked, slowly and deliberately, toward the front of the room. Every step echoed, every face turned. The weight of decades followed me like a second spine. I need to correct something, I said clearly. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The room was silent now. Dad blinked. Natalie, honey, I'm not in security, and I didn't never settle. Whispers started to rise. Phones were coming out of handbags. I left college because I was recruited by the Bureau, I said, voice steady. I've spent the last 20 years in counterterrorism. Last night, we took down the biggest domestic threat network in modern FBI history, and I led that operation. A hush fell. Some gasped. My aunt dropped her fork. Dad stood frozen. Then someone up front read aloud, "Wait, is this about Winterdome? That was her?" His phone lit up with my photo on screen. More phones, more staring. "Natalie Quinn," someone else muttered. "Special agent in charge." I turned back to my father. "You want to talk about success? I've spent my life keeping families like this one safe. I just didn't feel the need to announce it over champagne." And then I just stood there, letting it sit, letting it sting, letting the truth finally echo louder than his toast. The silence in the banquet hall clung to everything like fog. You could hear the clink of a fork being quietly set down, the buzz of a phone vibrating in someone's clutch. My father was still standing behind the microphone, his mouth slightly open, as if he was waiting for a script that never arrived. I didn't blink. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the one shrinking in the background. I wasn't going to let the narrative stay in his hands. The crowd around me was beginning to react, not loudly, but with the kind of slow, confused realization that spreads like a ripple through still water. My cousin Sierra's husband looked down at his phone, then did a double take. I saw a man at table 5, Austin's old college roommate, mouth something like, "That's her?" to his girlfriend. The truth was moving faster than the champagne. And then, as if the universe had been waiting for its cue, a hotel staff member burst through the side door holding a remote. He pointed it toward the large flat-screen TV mounted above the bar near the entrance, where a muted wedding slideshow had been looping all night. The screen flickered, then changed. CNN. Live. A news anchor in a Navy suit stood beside an image of the operation's central target, a domestic extremist financier whose name had been circulating in whispered corners of the country for years. The headline at the bottom of the screen made the room collectively gasp. Breaking, FBI confirms Natalie Quinn led Winterdome operation. Dozens arrested. White House responds. The anchor continued. Quinn, 41, is a 19-year veteran of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Over the last 2 years, she served as the undercover commander of Operation Winterdome, which dismantled a violent network responsible for multiple threats against U.S. infrastructure. My headshot appeared, taken in D.C. right before I left for the Montana base. No makeup, tactical black, eyes tired but unafraid. Gasps. People were standing now, some inching closer to the screen. Others turned back to me, and then again to the screen, as if they needed to confirm I was real. Dad was still holding the microphone, but his hand had dropped to his side. His other hand gripped the edge of the podium like it might float away. I took a breath. "Austin," I said quietly, turning to my brother. His head snapped toward me, eyes wide with the kind of disbelief you can't rehearse. "You didn't know," I said. "None of you did, because nobody ever asked." And that was the moment it landed for everyone in that room. I hadn't hidden who I was. I'd just stopped trying to explain it to people who'd already decided what box I belonged in. "I missed birthdays," I said softly, more to myself than anyone else. "I missed holidays. I spent Thanksgiving in a trailer wired with fiber optics. I've lived in 7 states in 6 years, and I did all of it for this country." I looked at my father. "You think success is corner offices and mortgages, but I've spent 2 decades keeping families safe while mine forgot to even check in." He looked shattered. Not humiliated. Not angry. Just small. For once, the arrogance was gone. All that remained was a man who had no idea who his daughter truly was, and who was now watching the rest of the world discover her before he ever bothered to. The TV behind us now showed a press conference, Director Landon at the podium giving a brief, with reporters shouting questions about next steps. One of them asked, "Will Agent Quinn be briefing the White House?" Landon nodded. I let that hang in the air. "Excuse me," I said quietly, turning from the front of the room. "I've got a call to take." And just like that, I walked away. Past the head table, past the rows of stunned faces, past the man who gave me his name but never his respect. And I never once looked back. I didn't actually take a call. I stepped into the hallway, stood by a window overlooking the dark, humid Texas night, and just breathed. It wasn't relief, it wasn't victory. It was the weight of 2 decades, finally setting down a burden I didn't realize I was still carrying. For 20 years, I had worn silence like armor. Let them believe what they wanted. Let them be comfortable. Because the truth always felt too complicated for dinner conversations and family cookouts. Too dangerous. Too unladylike. And now that the truth was out, it felt like breathing through glass. A few minutes passed before I turned and re-entered the banquet hall. My father's voice greeted me before I even reached the doorway. "And no matter what we think we know, sometimes life surprises us," he was saying, a little unsteady, but still at the mic. "It's clear that my daughter has accomplished quite a lot." Polite applause. It wasn't pride, it was cleanup, damage control. The lawyer in him was already drafting the closing argument. I stepped in and stood at the edge of the room. He saw me. "Natalie, would you like to say something?" he asked, his tone light but his posture stiff. I looked at him for a long moment. "Sure," I said, "I'd love to." And I began walking back toward the front of the room, again. Only this time, I didn't feel like I was crashing someone else's story. This time, I was here to rewrite it. The guests quieted again. Some looked uncomfortable, some looked curious, most just looked stunned. I reached the mic. "Thank you," I said calmly, taking a breath. "And thank you, Dad, for handing me the floor." He gave a tight smile and stepped back, folding his hands. I looked out at the crowd. My father is a man who built his legacy with words, with argument, with logic. He's known for the way he speaks, the way he commands a room. And for most of my life, I thought that meant I had to stay quiet for him to be heard. I paused, letting that land. But silence isn't the same as respect, and humility isn't invisibility. I glanced toward the bar, where the TV still played muted news coverage. My name still flickered across the ticker. I've never wanted the spotlight. I never needed it. What I wanted was acknowledgement, from the people who were supposed to know me best. But instead, for years, I was the punchline at Thanksgiving. The wandering daughter, the government mystery, the woman who never brought a date to Christmas and never gave you grandkids. That got a few uncomfortable shifts in seats. I didn't flinch. I don't regret the choices I've made. I don't regret the life I've lived. What I regret, I said, turning slightly to face my father, is allowing you to shape my story for this long without ever reading the first chapter. He stiffened, his mouth opened slightly. No words came. I softened my tone. You don't know about the nights I spent alone in safe houses, waiting for intel. The times I missed funerals because I was tracking targets through 3 time zones. The times I wore a fake name longer than my real one, and I never told you, because I didn't think you'd understand. I looked out again. But that was my mistake. I gave up on you before I gave you a chance to see me. The room was dead silent. Then slowly I turned back to my brother. "Austin," I said gently, "congratulations on your engagement. I mean that. I hope you never feel invisible in your own family." He looked stunned. His fiancée touched his arm, visibly shaken. And Dad, I added, just loud enough. He met my eyes. You built a legacy on being the voice in the room. Maybe now it's time to listen. I stepped back, letting that be the last thing I said. Then I turned and walked away. Again. But this time I wasn't retreating. This time I was reclaiming. I didn't stop in the hallway this time. I kept walking, down the corridor, past the bar, past the valet window, until I found myself in the side garden. A string of soft lanterns swayed above a small stone path, casting uneven light on the hedges and white chairs set out for tomorrow's brunch. The air smelled like rosemary and dusk, and for the first time that night I let myself feel it all. Not rage, not even sadness, just the weight of it. Of what it had taken to build a life I couldn't even talk about at my own family's table. You see, the resume they think they know, the one Dad mocks, the one the family gossips about behind sangria glasses, says I work in government. It's a joke to them, a polite placeholder, something vague enough to brush aside like a question you're too tired to answer. But my real resume? It's written in burner phones and coded calls, in freezing safe houses and parking garage dead drops. In long nights pretending to be someone I wasn't, just to get close to men planning attacks on American soil. I've stared down targets with nothing but instinct and wiretaps between us. I've watched friends in this line of work disappear, quietly transferred, quietly buried. There's no plaque for that, no framed degree, just memory and scars. I was 22 when I got my first assignment, deep cover in Nevada. I lived for 9 months as someone named Carrie. I sold furniture by day and met with confidential informants in laundromats by night. By the end of that case, I'd helped dismantle a pipeline of weapons being funneled to fringe militias in the Midwest. Dad never knew. Because back home, I was still the daughter who didn't finish college, who never brought a boyfriend to dinner, who missed Easter again. I was 30 when I tracked a suspect across 3 states, only to lose him in a grocery store parking lot and find him again 3 weeks later, after he'd already made contact with a U.S. senator's aide. That arrest made national news, but the name behind it didn't. I didn't need it to. Until tonight. Because tonight, I stood in a room full of people who had built a narrative around who I was, and never once thought to ask. And I had let them. I let them believe it was easier to reduce me to the wanderer than to explain what it meant to infiltrate hate groups and extremist cells. I didn't want to be pitied, or misunderstood, or turned into a conversation piece at Sunday brunch. But that silence had a cost. It made me invisible in my own story. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. I hesitated, then answered. Natalie Quinn, I said, voice low. Agent Quinn, a familiar voice replied. It was Director Landon. The White House wants you in D.C. Monday morning, full briefing, situation room. President may sit in. I closed my eyes and exhaled. Yes, sir, I'll be there. He paused. Did you stay for the whole party? I glanced back toward the banquet hall. The music had shifted again. Something softer now. Maybe they were doing the first dances. Maybe Dad was back to spinning tales that made more sense than truth. I stayed long enough, I said. And I meant it. Because I didn't need applause, I didn't need validation. But I needed them to know I was never the failure they painted me to be. I was the one who had already done more for this country than they could ever imagine. And now, I was the one being called to the most powerful room in the world. Not because of who my family thought I was, but because of who I chose to become. I didn't return to the ballroom. Not out of anger, not shame. But because I had said everything I needed to say, and for once they had heard me. I stood just outside the French doors, under a warm Texas sky heavy with stars, listening to the faint sound of laughter from inside. It was thinner now, softer, the kind of laughter people force when they don't know what else to do. I didn't blame them. In less than 30 minutes, their idea of who I was had shattered like one of the champagne flutes someone had dropped during the toast. The wandering daughter, the government ghost, the one who never settled down. Now I was something else entirely. I pulled out my phone again. There were dozens of texts, from colleagues, from field agents, from a CNN producer asking if I'd consider going live Monday night, from a woman I trained with 12 years ago who simply wrote, "You earned that mic drop." Then came the last one, Austin. Nat, I had no idea. I'm sorry. I want to talk if you'll let me. I stared at the message for a long time. He had always been the golden child, but not unkind, just complicit, comfortable in the version of the story that gave him the spotlight and let the rest fade to shadow. We had never really fought. We had just drifted into roles someone else had written for us. Maybe now that would change. Maybe. I slipped the phone into my bag and made my way toward the parking lot, heels in hand, the gravel crunching beneath my feet. I passed a few latecomers outside, whispering, not even trying to hide that they were talking about me. Is she the one from the news? Did you see the footage? That's her. Who would have guessed? I didn't stop, I didn't smile, but I heard every word, and for the first time, they didn't shrink me. They didn't pull me back into silence. They confirmed what I already knew. I was no longer invisible. As I reached my car, the door to the banquet hall opened behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't have to. I heard him. Natalie, my father said, his voice raw, unpolished. I paused, hand resting on the car door handle. The breeze shifted. He stepped closer, but not too close. I didn't know, he said, barely above a whisper. I thought you left because you were lost. I looked straight ahead. Let him say it. I'm sorry, he added, and this time it landed. It wasn't performative. It wasn't for the crowd. There was no microphone, no toast. Just a man who had spent a lifetime speaking and finally learning how to listen. I nodded once gently. I know, I said. And I got in the car. The engine hummed to life. I pulled out of the gravel lot and onto the road that led back toward my hotel. A quiet smile crept onto my face as I drove beneath the stars. I wasn't going home to a family that defined me by what I wasn't. I was going home to a mission, a calling, a purpose that I had built, earned, and lived without applause. And in 2 days, I'd sit across from the President of the United States, look him in the eye, and brief him on a case that had kept the country safe. And I'd do it not as the girl who never settled down, but as Special Agent in Charge Natalie Quinn, the woman who walked out of her own family's fantasy and into her own legacy. Some stories aren't told in real time. They're lived in silence, shaped in shadows, and finally spoken when the room is quiet enough to hear them. Natalie Quinn didn't walk away from her family that night to prove a point. She walked away to reclaim her worth, because the loudest kind of power is knowing who you are even when no one else does. So if they've called you a failure, if they've written you out of your own life story, remember this. You don't need permission to speak your truth. You don't need applause to own your greatness. And you don't owe anyone the smaller version of yourself just to make them comfortable. The world may never clap for your quiet victories, but that doesn't make them any less real. This was Natalie's story, but maybe it's yours too. Subscribe to Sweet Revenge Happy Ending for more stories where justice isn't just poetic, it's personal.